I was speaking to a client the other day who was expatriating, meaning he was giving up his U.S. citizenship, and I said, you'll have to start to rethink your estate plan. And he said to me, Doug, does that mean that I should start hiding money under my mattress? And I said, only if you want to have a real bumpy night's sleep. So dealing with people expatriating is actually something that over the decades I've had to look at more and more. In fact, according to the studies that I've seen, thousands and thousands of Americans have been giving up their citizenship every year. Now, in my day job, I work with people in Israel mostly, and people around the world, but mostly in Israel, Americans generally, who are American citizens and have U.S. investment accounts. But what happens when they give up their U.S. citizenship? I thought that I would make this episode of the Goldstein on Gelt show a really in-depth look at a real family that's really dealing with the issues. I've changed enough of the details so that I'm going to absolutely maintain everybody's confidentiality. But if this is something that you're thinking about, or it's come across your desk, or maybe someone's even advised you to do it in the past, I think this episode will be just for you. So today's Goldstein on Gelt show is about the journey to expatriation. Okay, so what's going on? Let me give you a little background of the couple, and you tell me if this sounds anything like you. So first things first, the couple is well into their retirement years, and they've been living in Israel for a long time. Now, sometimes people decide they're just giving up the U.S. citizenship and out they go, but this is not the case. These people had been U.S. citizens for many years. Actually, it was not their original citizenship, but they had literally been there for a big chunk of their life before they came to Israel. They traveled around the world, so they were comfortable with the international lifestyle. But that being said, they had settled and put their roots in Israel. Based on a number of factors and a few things that were going on in their financial world, the husband decided that it was time for him to give up his U.S. citizenship. So really, you have to understand, this is not a simple decision for anyone to make. Why? Because apart from the legal and financial and tax issues, there's a huge emotional component. So the first thing that happened is after he began considering it and talking about it with a tax attorney, he then brought his family together and said, listen, I'm thinking about giving up my U.S. citizenship. What do you all think? Now, one of the things that I've discovered with a lot of people in Israel is they have really dedicated their lives and their money and everything about them to Israel, and they don't really have much of a connection anymore to the United States. And although many of them, and myself included, are proud to be Americans as well, we're living in Israel now. This is our home, and we don't see ourselves, I need a place to go back, or really America's my home, but I'm just temporarily in Israel. No, that's not the case for pretty much everyone that I speak to. Most everyone I speak to is in Israel. They plan to stay, and their family understands that as well. But it's important to include everyone in the discussion. So the takeaway here of this part of what I want to talk about is, number one, make sure you speak to some professionals before you really jump in with 2 feet, just to make sure that it makes sense given your situation. 2, talk about it with your family. Next, you got to really begin to spell out your argument. Why are you giving up your U.S. passport? Why are you giving up your U.S. citizenship? So one of the things that they tell people is that officially you're not really allowed to give up your U.S. citizenship just to avoid paying taxes in America. That's the official position. Now, if you speak to lawyers or tax professionals, they'll say, of course, this plays into everyone's decision because once you give up your U.S. citizenship, you're no longer really going to be in the U.S. tax net. And in fact, in the conversations that I had related to this family, I asked the tax attorney, I said, isn't it true that the U.S. is going to track people down for another 10 years after they give up their U.S. citizenship? And he said it used to be like that, and now we don't really see that so much anymore. So the fact is, when someone gives up his U.S. citizenship, that's it. And one of the things, of course, he's saying goodbye to is the IRS, but there are other things that are going on as well. So make sure that the reasons that you're giving up your U.S. citizenship are going hand in hand with the global opportunities that you see for yourself, that the new culture you're living in is really where you want to live. I wouldn't suggest that someone, for example, who makes Aliyah, who moves to Israel, and then 6 months later says, I really love it here, I'm going to give up my U.S. citizenship. Whoa, take it easy. Make sure that you're really happy here. Maybe don't do 6 months, maybe do 6 years. Make sure you're settled. Make sure that your family in America understands you're doing it. One of the things to keep in mind is that moving to Israel for many people is fulfilling a dream, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily throwing out everything that came in the past. You just have to put everything into perspective. Now, there are going to be certain complexities to this. It's not a major, I would say life-altering. I guess it is life-altering if you give up your citizenship. But there are a lot of steps involved, not the least of which is actually going to a U.S. embassy, giving them your passport and saying, okay, I renounce my citizenship. Imagine the strain and the stress of doing that. I think that for a lot of people, and again, I'm going to use myself as an example. I grew up in New York when I was a kid. I was a Yankees fan and a proud American. And again, to this day, I still feel the same way. I feel very close to America and to my American roots. I have family that still lives in America. That being said, I'm happy to be in Israel. I've been here now for decades, and I'm planning to stay here, but it still would cause some emotional strain. You really have to work through this because you don't want to be going to the embassy and saying, okay, I'm here to give up. Oh, wait, maybe I'm not. Hold on, maybe I am. I can't decide. It's driving me crazy. You've got to make the decision on all levels. The other thing just to keep in mind, if we're talking about some of the legal issues, and this conversation that I had with the lawyer, was whether the husband who's giving up his citizenship in this case, is he going to have trouble getting back into the United States? Because are they going to say when you get to the border, oh no, we're not going to let you in? So the funny thing, or the big change these days, is that currently Israel has a new agreement with the United States that makes it easy for Israeli citizens to get a 10-year visa to come into America. And according to the lawyer, America's happy to have people come back in. It's not going to say, oh, because you gave up your U.S. citizenship, now we're going to punish you and not let you into the country. So he suggested that wasn't a problem, and I do know that's something that people are often very concerned about. There are really two main sides of this, right? There's the legal side, which we've spoken about, and then there's the financial side as well, and that's where I came into the discussion. Actually, the client got me into the discussion what I feel was a little bit later than I would have preferred. Why? Because he said, oh yeah, by the way, Doug, I'm giving up my U.S. citizenship. I said, wait a second, this is the first you're telling me? Maybe I could speak to your lawyer and your accountant before you do anything, because it's important that all your professionals are on the same page. And boy, was it important. Because one of the things that didn't come out in the conversation was the fact that once this client would give up his U.S. citizenship, all of a sudden a lot of his U.S. assets, including his brokerage account and his IRA account, would potentially then be subject to NRA, non-resident alien, estate tax. I'm not a tax advisor, and certainly what I'm discussing here is not tax advice, but what I brought up was for the client to have a discussion with me and his accountant and his tax lawyer. What is this NRA estate tax? So I'll give you just a little bit of an inkling, so if this is relevant to you, you'll be sure to discuss it with your professionals as well. America has an estate tax, a death duty. That means when someone dies, all the money that he has above a certain amount is subject to estate tax of up to 40%. Now, for American citizens, as of the year 2024, you can die with somewhere around $13 million before you have to start worrying about this. And if you're married, then between you and your spouse, you can have about $26 million before you have to start planning for this. But if you are a non-American, and this would be someone, by the way, who gives up his U.S. citizenship, if you're a non-American, and you have more than $60,000 in U.S. assets, and that the definition of U.S. assets is a little bit complicated. I'll get into that in a minute. But of U.S. assets, everything above $60,000 would be subject to U.S. estate tax at up to 40%. So what does that mean? Let's say that you own a $1 million apartment and you give up your U.S. citizenship, and your $1 million apartment is in New York City, and then you die. All of a sudden, everything between $60,000 and the $1 million is going to be subject to U.S. estate tax. Why? Because that apartment is considered to have its situs, its location, in the United States, because it actually is in the United States. Similarly, this could go with stocks or certain types of exchange-traded funds or mutual funds. It doesn't always apply to all of the securities in your portfolio. And as an investment advisor who specializes in cross-border clients, so I'm familiar with which assets are okay and no problem to hold for a non-resident alien, a non-American, and which ones are not okay. So I told the client, I said, listen, we need to prepare your portfolio before you give up your citizenship, because what happens if you go into the embassy, you give up your citizenship, you're so excited, you run outside, and God forbid, a bus runs you over. So we needed to prepare for that in advance. And that's just one example of why it's so important to have your attorney, your accountant, and your financial advisor all talking with each other and with you at the same time to make sure that everything is properly set up. Once the investments are set up properly in terms of taxes, then we can talk about what's the appropriate model for you. What's good asset allocation model? What percentage of your portfolio should be in stocks or bonds or cash or real estate? And these are the sort of standard questions that we talk to people about when we're dealing with their overall portfolio. And there are differences, and there are differences in the types of funds that we're going to buy for a non-American. And it's a great opportunity, if you give up your U.S. citizenship, to sit down and start from scratch and rebuild your plan and rebuild your outlook. And I'll tell you something, with this couple, that's what happened. We were talking about what their overall outlook was, and the couple, and the husband in particular, because he was now giving up his citizenship, once he realized there were certain investments that he couldn't hold, he said, you know something, Doug, maybe I'm even better off not holding them. I think I'd prefer not to. And ultimately, because they're well into their retirement years, in this case, we just made their portfolio much, much, much more conservative. The couple was worried about income that they would have every month, and we had to make sure that they would have enough income to pay the bills every month for the rest of their lives. So this specific issue is not a question of whether you're a U.S. citizen or you're not a U.S. citizen, but it is important for everyone to review. And I often talk to people about when there's money in motion, whether it's a wedding, a divorce, an inheritance, or giving up a citizenship. These are times that you should absolutely review your overall financial plan. In doing that, in fact, in this case, it's a little bit more complicated because now, since only the husband is giving up his U.S. citizenship and the wife is not, we now have to look at the two separate estates. And that means that not only is he going to the embassy to give up his citizenship, but now they have to start rewriting everything, all of their documents, their wills, their trusts. All of this has to be reconsidered in light of the new situation. So if you're going to get involved in this, make sure you realize there's a lot of steps involved, and I would strongly suggest make a checklist of everything that you need to do. When we work with clients who are dealing with expatriation, we go through all of the steps with them in advance so they know what they're going to get involved in. The side that we specifically deal with are the investments in the United States, but we want to make sure that the client knows everything to expect. Okay, one more point I want to make, which was very critical in this case, and in fact in many cases, is that people who have IRA accounts in the United States, an IRA account is an individual retirement account. And what that is it's a type of retirement account that has many, many, many rules and regulations. But probably the most common rule that people are familiar with is that when they turn 73, used to be younger, but now it's 73, when they turn 73, they're required to begin to take out a minimum amount of money, a piece of the portfolio. We call it an RMD, a required minimum distribution. Sometimes, depending on the size of the portfolio, sometimes it may be a few $100s, a few $1,000s, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. It could even be hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending how big the IRA account actually is. But in that case, what happens? When the money comes out of the IRA, the person has to pay tax on that money. That money has never been taxed up till that point. In other words, the client earned the money and he put it directly in and didn't pay tax on it. The IRA grew on a tax-deferred basis, meaning every year he didn't pay tax on it. And the IRS finally says, come on, eventually you have to pay us tax, which is why they have the required minimum distribution. You're required to take the money out and pay tax on it at that point. But there's an interesting opportunity for you, and this came up with this gentleman who was giving up his citizenship. He said, well, I'd like to not pay tax when I take the money out, and I'm a charitable kind of guy. And he gave a lot of money in charity. So in discussions with his accountant and his lawyer, we were able to set up for him a checkbook off this IRA. Now, normally people don't have checkbooks off their IRA, but he could write a check, and as long as he writes the check directly to a qualified charity, can't just be to anyone, but to a qualified charity, then given a number of conditions, which are a little bit more complicated than I want to go into today, but given a number of conditions, as long as he writes the check to a qualified charity, all of the money that he gives to the charity will go to the charity, and he's not going to have to pay any tax on it. So this is a great opportunity for people who are looking to give away money, to give charity, and to save on taxes, and who are otherwise taking money out of their IRAs. Now, as I've always told people, I'm not a tax advisor and I'm not a lawyer, but I deal with these issues from the investment side because in this case, the client was managing his IRA with us and his brokerage account was being handled with us, which is why I red flagged these issues regarding NRA. Again, NRA stands for non-resident alien. That's why I highlighted that issue with NRA estate tax, and we discussed the issue of being able to give money out of the IRA without having to pay any tax on that money, which is amazing. That means that the money went in, it grew, and it came out without actually having been taxed. So I hope this was a useful episode of the Goldstein on Gelt show. I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen. If you know people who might be in the situation where they're considering expatriation and you think they might need a little help with the U.S. side of it, certainly feel free to send them my way. If it's you, be sure to get in touch with us at the contact page of goldsteinongelt.com. Once again, my name is Doug Goldstein. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen.